The rain had not stopped for 3 days. It fell in relentless sheets against the windows of the Willow Creek Diner, blurring the view of the half-empty parking lot beyond. Inside, the smell of burnt coffee and rain-soaked wool hung in the air. At the corner booth sat Evelyn Rowe, a woman who looked as if she'd forgotten how to rest. Her uniform from the elementary school cafeteria was still damp, her auburn hair tied in a messy knot that had lost its battle with the weather hours ago. Across from her lay a sealed envelope addressed in neat, deliberate handwriting. To the Board of Education. The resignation letter she had rewritten 10 times but never found the courage to deliver. She stirred her coffee, though she hadn't taken a sip. The storm outside echoed the turmoil inside her chest. A child's laughter broke through the diner's gloom. A little girl, no more than 7, was spinning in circles near the jukebox, her pink rain boots squeaking on the linoleum. Evelyn smiled faintly until the girl tripped, scattering a handful of coins across the floor. "Ella," Evelyn called gently, kneeling to gather the coins. "Sweetheart, what did I tell you about spinning indoors?" "That I shouldn't, but the floor's shiny," Ella replied solemnly, her curls sticking to her damp cheeks. "Shiny floors make dancing better." Before Evelyn could reply, a low voice interrupted. "She's right, you know. Every dancer needs a proper stage." Evelyn looked up. Standing by the counter was a man in a tailored overcoat, rain dripping from his cuffs. He was out of place in the small-town diner, the kind of man who carried both confidence and melancholy like a second skin. "Sorry," he said quickly, noticing her guarded stare. "Didn't mean to intrude." She studied him for a moment. The expensive watch, the faint stubble, the haunted look in his gray eyes. "No harm done," she said finally, tucking the coins into her daughter's hand. The waitress arrived with another pot of coffee. "Mr. Raines, your usual?" He nodded. Evelyn recognized the name immediately. Julian Raines, the reclusive novelist who'd once made national headlines for donating half his fortune to literacy programs after his wife's death 5 years ago. Since then, he'd vanished from public life, rumored to be living somewhere near Willow Creek. Evelyn tried not to stare, but curiosity gnawed at her. What was a man like that doing here, in this dying town, in this nearly empty diner, looking like a ghost who'd wandered off the wrong page of his own story? Julian took the booth behind her. For several minutes, the only sounds were the rain and the faint hum of the jukebox. Then, quietly, he spoke again. Not to her, but as if thinking aloud. "Do you ever feel like life presses pause without asking permission?" Evelyn froze. Against her better judgment, she answered, "More often than I'd like." He turned slightly, his expression one of weary recognition. "I thought I was the only one." Something passed between them then, a flicker of understanding, fragile but undeniable. Two people on opposite ends of survival, each trying not to drown. Before Evelyn could respond, her phone buzzed. A message from her landlord. Rent overdue. Final notice before eviction. Her throat tightened. She tucked the phone away, forcing a smile for Ella, who was coloring a paper napkin with the diner's last working crayon. Julian noticed. Not the message, but the way her shoulders folded in on themselves, the way people do when they've run out of options. He remembered that posture. He'd seen it in the mirror after Claire died. "Excuse me," he said quietly to the waitress. "Could you add their bill to mine?" Evelyn's head snapped up. "No, that's not necessary." He met her gaze evenly. "Consider it a small kindness. No strings attached." Her jaw tightened. "I don't take charity." "Then think of it as an apology for interrupting your morning," he replied, his tone calm but unyielding. Before she could argue further, the waitress nodded and walked away, the exchange settled. Evelyn's cheeks burned, part humiliation, part something she couldn't quite name. "Mommy, is he a movie star?" Ella whispered loudly. Julian smiled faintly. Not anymore, he said softly. Evelyn managed a tight laugh, though her heart was racing for reasons that had little to do with embarrassment. When they left the diner 20 minutes later, the rain had softened into mist. Evelyn carried Ella on her hip, the resignation letter clutched in her other hand. She paused under the flickering streetlight outside, watching the puddles ripple in the lamplight. Behind her, Julian stood at the window, coffee untouched, watching them leave. He told himself he'd only meant to pay for their breakfast, that he wasn't the kind of man who interfered in strangers' lives anymore. Yet as he watched the mother and daughter disappear into the gray morning, a strange unease gripped him. Something about them, the small hand clutching the woman's coat, the tired grace in her movements, pulled at a place he thought long dead. He left a generous tip and stepped into the rain. Outside, Evelyn's car refused to start. She turned the key again. Nothing. The engine coughed once, then died. She rested her forehead against the steering wheel, eyes stinging. "Need a hand?" The voice came from the darkness. Julian stood there, holding an umbrella. She hesitated. Pride was a habit she couldn't afford to keep, but surrendering it felt like defeat. "I'm fine," she murmured. He didn't move. "You're not." For a moment their eyes met through the rain, two lives colliding in the quiet wreckage of circumstance. Julian knelt beside the hood, sleeves soaking instantly. "Loose connection," he muttered after a moment, tightening something with surprising ease. "Try it now." She turned the key. The engine roared to life. Relief flooded her chest. "How did you—" "Used to rebuild engines with my father," he said simply, before words became easier than tools. Evelyn exhaled a trembling laugh. "Thank you." He nodded. "Drive safe." As she pulled away, Julian watched the taillights disappear down the foggy road. He didn't know why he'd helped, or why he cared. But for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel suffocating. Back inside the diner, the waitress found the letter Evelyn had left behind. The envelope with her resignation, rain-spotted and forgotten on the booth seat. She held it up. "Mr. Raines, this yours?" Julian glanced at it, then took it slowly. "No," he said after a pause. "But maybe it's meant for me." Outside, thunder rolled across the valley, and the story of Evelyn Rowe and Julian Raines began. Not with love, but with a letter she never meant him to read. The following morning, the sun broke through the thinning clouds, turning the soaked streets of Willow Creek into mirrors of gold. Inside his lakeside cabin, Julian Raines sat at his desk, surrounded by the quiet hum of rainwater dripping from the eaves. The letter he'd found at the diner lay unopened in front of him, its edges still wrinkled from the storm. He had told himself a dozen times to return it. Drive into town, hand it back, forget the woman with the tired smile and the little girl who danced on shiny floors. But something about the handwriting stopped him. It was firm yet hesitant, the way people write when trying to convince themselves that a decision is final. He reached for the envelope and slid it open with the edge of an old fountain pen. The paper inside trembled slightly, as though reluctant to be read. "To the Board of Education, please accept this as my formal resignation from Willow Creek Elementary School. I can no longer provide the stability my students deserve. My daughter needs me, and I can no longer pretend I'm managing both. Thank you for the opportunity to serve this community. Signed, Evelyn Rowe." Julian read it twice, then a third time. The words were simple, yet each line carried a quiet kind of despair that reminded him of his wife, Claire, in her final year. The letters she wrote to herself when her illness began stealing her strength. Evelyn's letter was not about surrender. It was about survival. He folded it carefully and stared out the window. The lake shimmered beneath the morning light, deceptively calm. For the first time in months, Julian felt something other than numbness, a restless sense of purpose, though he didn't yet know what form it would take. Across town, Evelyn walked through the staff parking lot clutching an empty lunchbox and her daughter's hand. The resignation letter, or so she thought, sat in the top drawer of her desk, ready to be mailed after her shift. She didn't realize it had vanished until she reached the school office. Her pulse quickened as she rifled through her bag. No, no, no. "Everything all right, Ms. Rowe?" asked Principal Latham, glancing up from his paperwork. "Yes, I seem to have misplaced something important," she murmured, forcing a smile. She left the office quickly, Ella skipping beside her. Losing the letter wasn't a tragedy, she told herself. Maybe it was a sign. Maybe the universe was giving her one last chance to hold on before she let go completely. But by mid-afternoon, when her bank app confirmed her balance was barely enough for next week's rent, hope began to feel like a cruel joke. At dusk, Julian walked through the town square. The bakery window glowed with warm light, and the scent of cinnamon rolls drifted through the air. For years, he had hidden from public places, afraid of pitying glances, of questions about his withdrawal from the literary world. But today, anonymity felt liberating. He stopped at a bulletin board outside the post office. Among faded posters for garage sales and missing cats was a bright flyer, community fundraiser, help keep Willow Creek Elementary open. Every child deserves a chance. He stared at it for a long time. Then something in his mind clicked, a chain of cause and consequence snapping into place. The woman with the letter worked at that school, the same school struggling to stay afloat after budget cuts, the same school where dozens of children, including one little girl who loved to dance, might lose their safe place. Julian had been searching for meaning for years, trying to fill the void his wife left behind. Perhaps, he thought, meaning wasn't something you found. Perhaps it was something you built, piece by fragile piece. He pulled out his phone and dialed his assistant's number, the one person who still tolerated his erratic requests. "James," he said, "find out who runs the Willow Creek Elementary fundraiser. Quietly. I don't want my name attached to it yet." That night, Evelyn put Ella to bed early. The child's soft breathing filled the small apartment, the kind of sound that made the world seem bearable for a few hours longer. Evelyn sat by the window, watching the faint glow of lightning far beyond the hills. The day had drained her. The lost letter, the bills, the quiet humiliation of counting coins before buying groceries. She opened her laptop to check her email and froze. An unread message waited at the top of her inbox. From Willow Creek Education Foundation. Subject, Immediate Assistance Opportunity. Her heart raced as she clicked. Dear Ms. Rowe, our organization has received a nomination on your behalf for emergency financial support tied to our educator retention program. You may qualify for a temporary housing grant and supplemental income assistance. If interested, please schedule an intake call at your earliest convenience. There was no signature, only initials. J.R. Evelyn stared at the screen, disbelief tightening her chest. No one at the school would have nominated her. She'd told no one about her financial troubles. The only person she'd met outside her circle in weeks was that stranger at the diner. No, it couldn't be. She deleted the message, then restored it. Twice. The cursor blinked like an accusation. Finally, she closed the laptop and pressed her forehead to her knees. Why would a man like Julian Rains, if it even was him, care about someone like her? 2 miles away, Julian sat in his study, surrounded by unfinished manuscripts. The rain had returned, soft and steady, tapping against the glass. He opened a new document on his laptop and began typing, the first words he had written in years that didn't feel hollow. The story begins with a letter left behind, he wrote. A letter that was never meant to be found, but found exactly who needed it. He paused, staring at the sentence. Outside, lightning flashed, illuminating the worn photograph of Claire on his desk. "Don't look at me like that," he murmured. It's not what you think. But even as he said it, he felt her presence, the quiet, knowing look she used to give him when he pretended indifference. He sighed, deleting the sentence. Then, almost involuntarily, he opened his email and typed, Ms. Rowe, I found something that belongs to you. May I return it in person? J.R. He hesitated before hitting send. This wasn't pity, he told himself. It was correction, returning something lost. Yet deep down, he knew better. Some encounters weren't accidents. They were beginnings disguised as chance. Outside, the storm deepened, and somewhere across town, Evelyn's laptop chimed softly, the echo of a story neither of them yet understood they were writing together. The sound of her email notification had startled her, but it was the name beneath it that kept Evelyn awake long after midnight. J.R. She reread the message half a dozen times. I found something that belongs to you. May I return it in person? Logic told her to ignore it. Pride told her to delete it. But something quieter, something fragile and human, whispered that she should say yes. By morning, the whisper had become a decision. She typed a brief reply. Yes, I'll be at Willow Creek Elementary until 4. Then she deleted it, rewrote it, and sent it before she could lose her nerve. At 3:47 p.m., the hallway outside room 12 smelled faintly of chalk and wet paper. The last of the children had gone home, and the silence was almost unbearable. Evelyn sat at her desk, grading spelling tests, her fingers smudged with red ink. When a knock came at the door, she already knew who it was. Julian Raines stood there, umbrella in hand, rain clinging to his coat. Up close, he looked different from the man at the diner, more real somehow, the faint lines around his eyes deepened by sleeplessness. I hope this isn't a bad time, he said softly. Depends on what you're returning, she replied, gesturing toward the chair opposite her desk. He set the envelope gently in front of her. You left this behind. Evelyn froze. You opened it. He hesitated. I did. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have, but you did, she finished for him. Why? He exhaled. Because it felt like someone crying into a void, and because I've written too many letters like it myself. For a long moment, neither spoke. Outside, the rain tapped steadily against the classroom window. Evelyn stared at the envelope, her chest tightening with a mix of embarrassment and relief. You had no right, she whispered, though her voice lacked conviction. You're right, he said simply. But if I hadn't read it, I wouldn't have known that someone who gives so much to others was about to disappear quietly. I thought maybe I could help. She looked up sharply. Help? You mean that mysterious email? The grant? His silence was admission enough. Evelyn rose from her chair. You had no right to interfere in my life. You don't even know me. Julian didn't flinch. You're right again. I don't know you. But I saw someone standing at a breaking point, and I've been there. The edge in his tone caught her off guard. You talk like someone who's lost everything, she said before she could stop herself. He gave a small, humorless smile. You're not wrong. The rain intensified, a steady drumbeat against the glass. Something in his expression, a flicker of grief too raw to fake, dissolved the rest of her anger. I shouldn't have yelled, she murmured. I'm just tired. Everything feels like drowning lately. Julian's voice softened. Then maybe it's time someone helped you breathe again. He placed a folded sheet of paper on her desk. It's an introduction to the Willow Creek Education Foundation. They're launching a pilot program for single-parent educators. Housing support, tuition assistance, after-school childcare. You'd qualify. Evelyn blinked, stunned. You set this up? I suggested it, he corrected. They acted. That's all. You really don't know how boundaries work, do you? She said. though there was a faint tremor of laughter behind the words. Julian shrugged. Boundaries save lives, but sometimes they keep us trapped in them too. Their eyes met, a pause that stretched too long, carrying too much. Then Evelyn looked away, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. I'll think about it. That's all I ask. As he stood to leave, Ella's voice echoed from the doorway. Mommy, can we go now? The little girl burst in, her backpack nearly half her size. Her eyes lit up when she saw Julian. It's the man from the diner. Julian smiled, kneeling to her height. You remember me? You fixed Mommy's car, Ella said proudly. She said that was very gentlemanly. Evelyn turned scarlet. I did not say that. Julian laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years, and the sound startled even him. Your mom's very kind, he told Ella. Ella studied him seriously. You look sad when you smile, like my snow globe after it breaks. The room went still. Evelyn felt her throat tighten, unsure whether to scold or apologize, but Julian only nodded. That's very wise, Ella. Broken things can still be beautiful, though. Ella's face brightened. That's what Mommy says about old books. Julian smiled at Evelyn. She's raising a philosopher. When they finally said goodbye, the rain had eased into mist. Evelyn watched through the classroom window as Julian crossed the parking lot, his silhouette dissolving into the fog. She thought of his words, someone helped you breathe again, and hated that they stayed with her long after he was gone. That evening, Julian returned to his cabin by the lake. He hung his coat, poured himself a glass of scotch, and sat before the half-finished manuscript that had mocked him for years. He stared at the blinking cursor. The story he'd been trying to write, the one about grief, redemption, and the cost of silence, suddenly had a face. Not his, hers. He began typing. She had the look of someone who had forgotten how to ask for help. The world had taught her that kindness came with interest, but sometimes kindness was just a bridge between strangers who'd both stopped believing in miracles. He stopped, reading the words aloud. For the first time since Claire's death, the emptiness didn't feel like a void. It felt like a space being filled. Meanwhile, Evelyn sat in her tiny apartment, the envelope from the foundation open on the kitchen table. Ella was asleep in the next room, her favorite storybook clutched to her chest. The offer was real. Housing assistance, childcare, an education stipend. Everything she'd been too proud to ask for. She traced the signature at the bottom. Not J.R. this time, but Julian Rains, printed formally in black ink. So he was that Julian Rains, the recluse, the novelist, the man whose fortune she'd only ever seen in headlines. And yet, he'd knelt in the rain to fix her car, paid for her breakfast, remembered her daughter's name. She folded the letter and pressed it to her chest. Maybe this was fate's strange idea of mercy, the moment before the tide turned. Or maybe it was something else entirely. Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of chimes across the night. In another house by the lake, Julian heard the same wind through his open window and looked up, as if sensing her thoughts echoing his own. Neither of them knew that this was only the beginning, that the letter had tied their fates together more tightly than either could undo. The next morning dawned cold and silver, the lake veiled in mist. Julian Rains stood on his deck with a mug of black coffee, watching the fog roll across the water. The world felt suspended between seasons, not quite winter, not yet spring, a fitting metaphor for his life, he thought. He had always believed in control, in rewriting the chaos of the world through words and structure. Yet lately, since that day in the diner, his world had shifted into something he couldn't edit or predict. He set down his mug and glanced at his phone. A new message waited. Mr. Rains, I received your letter from the Foundation. I've decided to accept the offer, though I'm still not sure why I'm doing this. Maybe I'm tired of being afraid of help. Thank you, I suppose. E. Rowe. Julian read it twice, feeling a quiet relief settle in his chest. He typed a reply, paused, and deleted it. Words were his profession, yet in moments like this, they never seemed adequate. 2 weeks later, Evelyn parked her aging car outside the Willow Creek Community Apartments, a modest cluster of refurbished townhomes funded by the foundation. Her daughter, Ella, sat in the back seat hugging her stuffed fox, excitement glowing in her small face. "Mommy, is this really our new house?" Evelyn smiled, though the smile trembled at the edges. "It's temporary housing, sweetheart. Just for a while." "But it's got a balcony," Ella said, already unbuckling her seatbelt. "That's forever enough." Evelyn laughed despite herself. For a child who'd lived her whole life in a one-bedroom apartment that smelled of mildew and exhaustion, a balcony might as well have been a palace. Inside, the apartment was small but bright. Fresh paint, new curtains, and a vase of wildflowers on the kitchen table, touches that made the place feel less like charity, more like possibility. There was a note by the flowers. "Welcome to Willow Creek Housing. We're glad you're here. If you need anything, call this number. Foundation Support Liaison, J.R." Evelyn rolled her eyes. Of course. But that night, when the heater hummed softly and Ella fell asleep under her new quilt, Evelyn found herself dialing the number anyway. He answered on the second ring. "Rains. You really left flowers?" she asked, half amused, half bewildered. "You sound disappointed." "I expected a clipboard and a welcome packet, not daisies." "I thought daisies were more human," he said. "You've had enough forms in your life." Evelyn leaned against the counter, smiling in spite of herself. "You're a strange man, Mr. Raines." "Julian," he corrected. "Please." "Julian, then. What exactly is your role in all this? Am I supposed to report to you like some kind of experiment?" He chuckled softly. "No. The foundation is just providing structure. You're the one rebuilding the rest." "Right," she said, "with your name stamped at the bottom of every letter." "Would it make it easier if I disappeared from the picture?" he asked. Evelyn hesitated. The truth was yes and no. "Maybe, but I think it's too late for that." Over the following weeks, Julian found himself driving into Willow Creek more often than he intended. At first, he justified it as oversight, checking progress reports, attending foundation meetings, ensuring that the new housing initiative was running smoothly. But by the third visit, when he brought a box of secondhand books for Ella's school library, he stopped pretending. He just wanted to see them. When he arrived, Evelyn was outside pruning the overgrown shrubs by the front porch. She looked up, startled. "Mr. Raines," she said, shading her eyes from the sun. "I come bearing gifts," he said, lifting the box of books. She eyed it warily. "You do realize most people send text messages." "I prefer physical gestures," he said simply. She sighed but couldn't hide the smile tugging at her lips. "You're impossible." "Persistent," he corrected. "Semantics." He followed her inside, setting the books on the table. The apartment smelled faintly of cinnamon, a candle probably, or maybe her baking. He noticed a stack of nursing textbooks beside the couch. "You're studying again," he said. "I'm trying," she replied, brushing dust from her hands. "It's part of the program. They're giving me credit toward an RN certification. I still work mornings at the cafeteria, though. Bills don't vanish just because someone wants to help." Julian smiled faintly. "I didn't expect them to." Evelyn hesitated, then asked, "Why are you really doing all this?" He paused. "Because I can." That's not an answer. He looked at her, really looked, and something unguarded slipped through. "Because I remember what it's like to lose someone and not know how to start again." You remind me of what surviving looks like. She went still. I'm not sure that's a compliment. It's the highest one I know, he said quietly. For a moment, neither moved. The silence between them felt charged. Not romantic exactly, but heavy with something neither dared name. Then Ella's laughter echoed from the next room. Mom! Mr. Julian! Come see! I built a blanket fort! Evelyn exhaled the tension with a laugh. Saved by the architect. Julian smiled, following her into the living room. The fort was magnificent. 2 chairs, a broomstick, and a patchwork of blankets forming a sagging castle. It's perfect, he said, crouching to inspect it. What's the password? Ella grinned. Only nice people allowed. Then I barely qualify, he murmured, ducking inside. The 3 of them sat under the blanket fort, the small space illuminated by the glow of a flashlight. Ella chattered endlessly about her school friends and the new playground. Evelyn listened, her face softening with something Julian hadn't seen before. Peace. He realized then that he would do almost anything to keep that look on her face. Later that night, as he drove back toward the city, Julian's phone buzzed. It was his foundation director, Mira Chen. I need an update on your Willow Creek project, she said. The board wants to know why you're personally visiting one of the recipients. Julian gripped the steering wheel. Because it's working. Because for once, the foundation is changing an actual life instead of just writing checks. You're too close to this, Mira warned. Emotionally, I mean. He stared at the empty road ahead. Maybe that's what it takes to remember why I started any of this. After the call ended, he sat in silence. Outside his windshield, the rain had started again, the same steady rhythm that seemed to follow him everywhere. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing for certain. Evelyn Rowe was no longer just a line in a story he was helping to write. She was the reason he'd started writing again at all. The first snow arrived earlier than anyone expected. Willow Creek turned white overnight, a soft blanket over roofs and roads that made the entire town look like something out of a forgotten dream. Evelyn Rowe woke to the sound of her daughter laughing at the window. Mom, it's snowing! Real snow! Evelyn smiled as she joined her. The flakes swirled like powdered sugar over the balcony rail. For the first time in years, she didn't wake up dreading the day. The apartment was warm, the bills were paid, and Ella had boots that fit. Stability, the one thing she'd begged the universe for, had finally arrived. Still, part of her couldn't shake the feeling that good things didn't come without cost. Downstairs, a car engine idled. When she looked out, she wasn't surprised to see Julian Rains leaning against his dark SUV, hands in his coat pockets, a faint trail of mist curling from his breath. He was early, and she had no idea why her heart always tripped at the sight of him. She cracked the window. You're here before sunrise, are you lost? He looked up, amused. Field visit. I was in town anyway. Field visit? You sound like a tax auditor. Worse, he said with a smirk. A philanthropist with opinions. She shook her head, chuckling. Give me 10 minutes. By the time they reached the cafe on Main Street, the snow had thickened, muffling the world outside. The small-town chatter and the smell of cinnamon rolls wrapped around them like warmth. Julian stirred his coffee absently while she talked about her nursing coursework, the long nights, the balance between school and work. I don't know how you do it, he admitted. You learn, she said. When quitting isn't an option, you get creative. He smiled. That's a line worth stealing. You already stole my resignation letter once, she teased. He laughed, a low, genuine sound that made her glance away too quickly. There were moments when she forgot who he was, the famous author turned recluse, the billionaire behind the foundation, the man with a ghost of grief in his eyes. When he smiled like this, he seemed just human. So, she said, leaning back, Why do I get the feeling you didn't drive out here just for coffee? Julian hesitated. There's a new initiative the board wants to approve, expanding the housing program statewide. They want me to present it, and they want someone who's lived it to speak. Her eyes widened. Me? You. Who better to explain what this actually means to families? Evelyn's first instinct was panic. Julian, I'm not public. I work with kids, not cameras. It's not a performance, he said. It's truth. You've lived it more authentically than anyone I've met. She studied him, unsure whether to feel honored or terrified. When is it? Next month, Charlotte. I'll handle the logistics. You'd just tell your story. She sighed, half laughing. You're very good at getting your way. I've had practice, he said quietly. Then his phone buzzed. One glance at the screen drained the warmth from his face. Evelyn caught the shift immediately. Everything okay? He nodded, though his jaw had tightened. Old business. It can wait. But it didn't. The name on the phone, Celeste Raines, his late wife's sister, had a way of pulling him back to places he'd fought to forget. That night, Julian drove back to his lake house through falling snow, his thoughts tangled. He hadn't told Evelyn the full truth. Celeste had been managing the literary estate ever since Claire's death, and she didn't approve of his small-town distractions. When he finally called her back, her tone was crisp. You missed the board meeting again. I had a conflict. Another one involving the woman in Willow Creek? Julian sighed. You've been checking on me again. I've been protecting you, she corrected. You're building something dangerous. Foundations and charity work are one thing. But personal involvement? You're repeating history, Julian. He bristled. Helping someone isn't history repeating. Falling for someone broken is, she said sharply. The silence stretched. Finally, he said, You don't know her. I don't need to. I know you. He ended the call before anger turned to guilt. Outside, the lake had frozen at the edges, the surface reflecting the pale moonlight like fractured glass. Julian stood there for a long time, watching his own reflection blur in the cold wind. He didn't know what scared him more, that Celeste might be right, or that she wasn't. The next day, Evelyn received a delivery at the school, a slim box wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a small silver pendant shaped like an open book. No note. She didn't need one. When she saw Julian later that evening, he'd come by to drop off paperwork, she held it up. Subtle. He looked momentarily embarrassed. A thank you. For agreeing to speak at the event. You didn't have to. I know. But I wanted to. Their eyes met, and the air between them shifted, charged, uncertain. For the first time, she saw not the calm philanthropist, but the man beneath, raw and uncertain, reaching out without words. She placed the pendant in her palm. Then thank you. But next time, just buy me coffee. He smiled. Deal. A week later, Evelyn began rehearsing for the Charlotte conference. Late nights found her pacing the living room, trying to condense years of struggle into a few coherent minutes. One evening, after Ella had gone to bed, she video-called Julian for feedback. He listened silently, nodding. When she finished, his voice was soft. It's perfect. You're not telling a story. You're telling truth. I sound nervous, she said. You sound real. Don't change that. She smiled faintly. You know, I used to hate you. Only used to? Well, I still might, she teased. But it's confusing now. Julian laughed, then quieted. It's confusing for me, too. Their eyes met through the screen, an intimacy so quiet it hurt. Neither of them said the word love. It would have felt premature, fragile, like a spark in a storm. But both knew something had begun, something that neither expected, and both were afraid to name. Outside, snow kept falling over Willow Creek, soft and endless. Inside, two people on opposite sides of survival were learning, slowly, what it meant to build something new from the ruins of what they'd lost. And far away, in a city already planning its next headline, unseen eyes were beginning to take notice. The hotel ballroom shimmered under crystal chandeliers, every surface gleaming with quiet affluence. Rows of cameras and journalists filled the back of the room, their flashes reflecting off the glass podium where Julian Rains was about to speak. Behind the velvet curtain, Evelyn Rowe adjusted the neckline of her modest navy dress, palms clammy despite the cool air. The event, the Langston Education Initiative Conference, was supposed to celebrate community partnerships, but it felt more like walking into the lion's den. "You're trembling," Julian whispered, noticing her hands. She gave a nervous laugh. "It's not every day I speak to people whose shoes probably cost more than my rent." He smiled softly. "They're just people. Some richer, some louder, but people nonetheless." "Easy for you to say," she murmured. "You are one of them." Julian's expression flickered, then softened. "Not today. I'm not. Today, I'm just the man introducing you." Before she could respond, the announcer's voice boomed through the speakers. "Please welcome author and philanthropist Julian Rains." The applause was polite, but thunderous. Julian stepped out into the spotlight, his usual calm replaced by something warmer. His gaze found Evelyn briefly before he began speaking. "When we talk about education, we talk about statistics, graduation rates, funding numbers, policy goals. But behind those numbers are faces, families, teachers, people who wake up every day and fight invisible battles just to keep going." He paused, the audience quiet. "A few months ago, I met someone who reminded me why this work matters." The spotlight shifted slightly toward the wings. Evelyn froze. "Her name is Evelyn Rowe," Julian continued. "A teacher, a mother, and the kind of person who redefines strength without realizing it. She taught me that second chances don't begin with money or programs. They begin with belief." The crowd applauded again. Evelyn inhaled deeply and stepped out as he gestured toward her. Her heels clicked softly on the stage. The microphone seemed to grow larger as she approached it. For a moment, all she could hear was her heartbeat. Then she began. "I used to believe life was something that happened to you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "That you endure it the way you endure a storm, by waiting for it to pass. I was wrong." She glanced toward the audience, faces blurring in the bright light. "Life isn't a storm. It's a series of small moments, people you meet when you least expect them, a stranger who holds a door open, a friend who listens, a child who laughs, or sometimes, someone who refuses to let you give up." Her eyes found Julian. "I was a single mother, working 3 jobs, on the verge of losing everything. And then someone reminded me that dignity doesn't mean doing everything alone. It means having the courage to accept help and still keep standing." Her voice broke slightly, but she continued. "I stand here today not as someone rescued, but as someone seen." The room was silent. Even the cameras paused. When she stepped off stage, Julian was waiting. "You were extraordinary," he said quietly. She smiled shakily. "I didn't faint. I'll count that as victory." He laughed softly. "You did more than that." The evening ended with applause, interviews, and flashbulbs. But not everyone in the audience had been clapping for the same reasons. In the third row, Celeste Rains sat motionless, watching the stage with narrowed eyes. The resemblance to Julian's late wife, Claire, was uncanny. The same dark curls, the same determined set of the jaw. She turned to the woman beside her, a journalist she'd invited discreetly. You see what I mean? He's replacing grief with guilt. Again. The reporter raised an eyebrow. And you're telling me this woman is the centerpiece of his new inspirational campaign, Celeste interrupted smoothly. Just make sure the story gets told. By the next morning, it did. The headline read, Reclusive Novelist's Secret Muse, the single mother behind his foundation's revival. The article painted a portrait of Julian Rains as a man seeking redemption through a woman who resembles his late wife, complete with invasive speculation about their relationship. Evelyn saw it on her phone before her morning shift. Her stomach twisted. The accompanying photo, her standing beside Julian on stage, his hand lightly on her shoulder, made everything look exactly as the tabloids wanted it to. Within hours, her email overflowed. Messages from reporters, acquaintances, even her school principal. When Julian arrived at the foundation office, Mira Chen met him at the door, holding a printed copy of the article. You need to see this. He scanned the page, fury tightening his jaw. Who leaked this? We're tracking it, Mira said. But it's already viral. It's not just gossip. It's questioning the integrity of the foundation. Julian swore under his breath. Call our PR team. Issue a statement. I'll talk to Evelyn myself. Evelyn didn't answer his first two calls. When he showed up at her apartment that evening, she opened the door slowly, her face pale. Don't, she said softly. Please don't say you're sorry. I can't hear that right now. He hesitated. Then tell me what you need. I need this to stop. I didn't sign up to be anyone's scandal. Julian's voice was low, steady. You didn't do anything wrong. You spoke with honesty, and the world twisted it. Her eyes flashed. Because of you. Because you live in a world where generosity is suspicious and compassion looks like a headline. He took a step closer, but she backed away. Evelyn, do you know what it's like to fight for normalcy and then have it taken because of a man who didn't think twice about being photographed with you? He swallowed hard. You think I didn't? I think you forgot I'm not part of your story, she whispered. I'm trying to live my own. Her words hit harder than any headline. He nodded slowly. If that's what you want, I'll fix it. I'll make sure the foundation releases a statement clearing your name. She exhaled shakily. I don't need a statement. I need peace. Julian stood there, drenched in silence and regret. He wanted to tell her that peace without her didn't mean anything, but he didn't. When he left, the snow had stopped falling. The air was painfully clear. Back in his car, he saw her light go out through the window, a soft click that sounded too much like an ending. At the lake house, Julian sat before the blank screen of his computer, the cursor blinking like a pulse he couldn't match. The story he had begun, about loss, hope, and the letter that started everything, stared back at him unfinished. He typed one line before closing the laptop. Maybe love isn't found in the light, but in the shadows we're brave enough to walk through. Outside, the frozen lake reflected the fractured moonlight, and for the first time, Julian Rains wasn't sure if the light ahead meant redemption or another storm waiting to break. The days after the scandal blurred together in a dull haze of whispers, headlines, and silences. For Evelyn Rowe, time felt like it had folded in on itself, everything that had bloomed between her and Julian Rains reduced to a single relentless question whispered by strangers. Who is she to him? She deleted her social media, stopped answering calls, and threw herself into work and study as though exhaustion could erase the ache. The foundation had issued a public statement calling the rumors false and defamatory, but it changed little. In the eyes of a curious world, perception was reality. The only message she didn't delete came from Julian himself. I'm sorry. Not for helping you, but for the cost it came with. You deserved protection, not exposure. If you never speak to me again, I'll understand. But please know this. I'd undo the world to give you peace." Evelyn read it once. Then she locked her phone and cried quietly where her daughter couldn't hear her. 3 weeks later, the first thaw began. The snow along the Willow Creek sidewalks melted into small rivers, carrying away the last traces of winter. At the school, Evelyn finished her final shift in the cafeteria before starting her new rotation as a nursing intern. The job change had been part of the Foundation's scholarship program, a path to a better life, though now it felt bittersweet. Her supervisor handed her a sealed envelope before she left. "This came for you through the Foundation office. No return address." Inside was a letter written in a familiar, meticulous hand. "There's a new community clinic opening in Maple Hollow, a small town an hour east. They're short-staffed, underfunded, but it's where the first scholarship expansion will take root. They could use someone like you to guide it. Consider it an offer, not from the Foundation, but from me. No cameras, no press, just people who need you. J.R." At the bottom was a handwritten postscript. "Tell Ella the library there has a window seat made for dreamers." Evelyn folded the letter slowly. She should have ignored it. She should have stayed where she was safe. But the truth was, safety had started to feel a lot like silence. 2 weeks later, Evelyn and Ella arrived in Maple Hollow, a speck of a town nestled between pine hills and dirt roads. The community clinic was housed in an old brick building that smelled faintly of antiseptic and hope. Evelyn threw herself into the work, long shifts, demanding patience, scarce resources. The exhaustion was familiar, but this time, it came with meaning. At night, when Ella was asleep, she'd sometimes catch herself looking out the window toward the hills, half expecting to see Julian's dark SUV on the road below. He never came. But sometimes she imagined he might, until the day he did. It was a Saturday morning when the front desk nurse called out, "Evelyn, someone's here asking for you." She turned and froze. Julian stood in the doorway, coat dusted with road salt, eyes shadowed by the kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix. She took a step back. "What are you doing here?" "I heard you'd come to Maple Hollow," he said simply. "From who?" "The Foundation sends me reports," he admitted. "I didn't mean to intrude." Her voice was wary. "You always say that right before you do." He smiled faintly. "Old habits." Evelyn crossed her arms, her heartbeat unsteady. "If you came to check on your project, congratulations. It's running fine. If you came to check on me, don't." Julian's voice was calm, but low. "I didn't come to check. I came to apologize properly." She hesitated. "You already did." "Not in person." There was something in his eyes, quiet, raw, and human. "You were right," he said. "I live in a world built on noise. But the one thing I found worth listening to, I managed to break." Evelyn's throat tightened. "You didn't break it. The world did. I let it." The room was silent except for the faint hum of a heart monitor in the next room. Finally, she exhaled. "Why are you really here, Julian?" He stepped closer. "Because every story I've written since meeting you has felt like an echo. And every time I try to start a new one, it ends up back at that diner, with you, your daughter, and a letter left behind." She stared at him, torn between anger and something dangerously close to forgiveness. "Do you still write about me?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. "No, I write because of you." Her composure cracked. "That's not fair." "No," he agreed softly. "But it's true." For a long moment, neither moved. The world outside the clinic seemed to hold its breath. Then Ella's voice broke through, bright and small. "Mommy? Is that Mr. Julian?" Julian turned, startled, as the little girl ran forward. She was taller now, missing a front tooth, her curls a bit wilder. "Ella," Evelyn began, but it was too late. She was already hugging him. "You disappeared," the child exclaimed. "Mom said you were busy saving the world." Julian crouched, smiling through the ache in his chest. "I was trying to. Didn't do a very good job, did I?" Ella shook her head seriously. "You should visit more. Grown-ups need friends too." He laughed, a sound rougher than it used to be. "I'll remember that." Evelyn watched, her guard softening despite herself. When Julian stood again, his gaze met hers. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I had to see that you were okay." "I'm fine," she said automatically. He smiled faintly. "You're lying." "Maybe." Julian exhaled slowly. "I'll be in town for a few days. There's an inn by the river. If you ever want to talk, not about the Foundation, not about the past, just talk. I'll be there." She nodded, unsure whether she meant it as agreement or dismissal. After he left, she sat at her desk for a long time, staring at the door he'd walked through. That night, she couldn't sleep. The town was quiet, snow whispering against the window pane. She looked at Ella, dreaming peacefully in her blanket cocoon, and thought of Julian's tired eyes. Maybe some things weren't meant to be erased, only rewritten. The next morning, she drove toward the river. The inn sat beneath tall pines, its windows glowing gold in the early light. Julian was sitting outside, notebook open, steam curling from his coffee. When he saw her car, he stood. Evelyn rolled down the window. "You said you'd be here." "I meant it," he said. "You always did doubt me." "I still do," she admitted, smiling faintly. He nodded. "Good. Keeps me honest." She stepped out of the car, snow crunching beneath her boots. "So what happens now?" Julian closed his notebook gently. "Maybe," he said, "we stop trying to fix what broke and start learning how to live with it." And for the first time in months, Evelyn didn't argue. Spring came to Maple Hollow like a secret whispered by the earth itself. One morning, the frost simply vanished. The air smelled of rain and lilac. Birds returned to the trees along the river, and the clinic windows stood open for the first time since winter. Evelyn Rowe stood by one of those windows, watching her daughter chase sunlight across the courtyard. Ella's laughter rose and fell like music, pure, untamed, unafraid. It had been 3 months since Julian Rains had arrived unannounced at the clinic. 3 months since the conversation that had shifted everything between them, the apology that had felt like both a wound and a balm. They had not rushed what came next. They met quietly, shared coffee at dawn, walked the river trail on Sundays when Ella tagged along, spoke about books and mistakes and the strange ways people survived each other. If anyone in town suspected what they were building, no one said a word. Maple Hollow, in its small mercy, had learned how to keep a secret. This morning, though, Julian was late. Evelyn tried not to notice the clock. She had patience, charts, a dozen things to do. But habit made her glance at the door each time the bell above it jingled. Finally, near noon, he appeared, wind-blown, cheeks flushed from the climb up the hill. He held a cardboard box in both arms. "You're late," she said, though her smile betrayed her relief. "Worth it," he replied, setting the box on the counter. "Had to make a stop in Charlotte." She frowned. "That's 2 hours away." "I know." He pulled back the box flaps. Inside were 10 brand new tablets, each loaded with educational apps and digital nursing resources. "For the clinic," he said, "and for the outreach program you're starting next month." Evelyn blinked. "Julian, this is too much." He shook his head. "It's not charity. It's collaboration. You're running the clinic now, like you were meant to. Let me help you do it right. Her voice softened. You really don't know when to stop saving people, do you? He smiled faintly. Only the ones worth it. She looked away before her heart betrayed her face. Later that afternoon, as rain began to patter against the clinic roof, Julian found Ella in the waiting room, sitting cross-legged with a notebook. What are you drawing? He asked. She looked up, grinning. A rocket ship. Going anywhere special? To the moon, she said. Mom says that's where dreams go when they're too big for people. Julian chuckled softly. Your mom's a poet. She's sad sometimes, Ella added matter-of-factly. But not like before. He nodded, a lump forming in his throat. She's strong. So are you, Ella said. Even if you don't look like it. He laughed, but it cracked slightly. Thank you, Ella. Before she could reply, Evelyn appeared in the doorway, arms crossed but smiling. You two conspiring again? Only to take over the moon, Julian said. Good, she said. Maybe start with laundry day. The three of them laughed, a sound that filled the small clinic with something bigger than joy, something like belonging. That evening, after closing, Evelyn and Julian walked along the riverbank. The rain had stopped, leaving the air heavy and clean. The setting sun caught the water, scattering gold across its rippling surface. I heard from the foundation today, Julian said quietly. They're ready to hand over full administration of the scholarship program. To you. Evelyn stopped walking. To me? He nodded. You've been running it in practice for months. It's time the title matched the work. I don't know what to say. Say yes. She laughed softly. I was going to. They continued in silence for a while, the kind that didn't need filling. Julian, she said finally, her voice low. When I first met you, I thought you were trying to fix me. I was, he admitted. I just didn't realize I was trying to fix myself too. She turned to him, searching his face. Do you ever think about her? Claire? He didn't look away. Every day. But it's different now. Grief used to feel like a room I couldn't leave. You showed me there was a door. Her eyes glistened. And where does it lead? He smiled faintly. Here. A single raindrop fell between them, then another. Within seconds, the sky broke open again, soft rain cascading around them. Evelyn laughed, pulling her coat tighter. Every time we talk about something real, it rains. Maybe the world just likes eavesdropping, Julian said, stepping closer. She looked up at him, her hair damp, her eyes reflecting the storm. And what are we now, Julian? Friends? Partners? Something we'll regret later? He took a breath. Maybe all of those. Maybe none. But whatever this is, I'd rather walk through it with you than without you. The words hung between them, simple, unpolished, real. And for once, Evelyn didn't run from what she felt. She stepped closer until the rain softened into mist, until their foreheads nearly touched. Okay, she whispered. But if this falls apart... He finished for her. Then we build again. Their hands found each other, tentative at first, then certain. Months later, summer arrived. The clinic thrived under Evelyn's leadership. The scholarship program expanded to new towns, and the foundation, now restructured, worked directly with community partners instead of through bureaucratic intermediaries. Julian wrote again, not novels this time, but essays, stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things quietly. His newest book was titled The Letter Left Behind. At the dedication ceremony in Charlotte, he stood at the podium, hands trembling slightly as he read the inscription, "For E.R. and E.R., who taught me that some letters change more than lives. They change the meaning of love itself. Evelyn sat in the front row beside Ella, her hand resting lightly over her daughter's. When he looked up from the page, their eyes met, the kind of look that spoke of everything already said and everything still to come. Later that night, after the applause and the photos and the long drive back to Maple Hollow, Julian walked her to her door. "Do you ever think about how it started?" she asked. "That day in the diner?" He nodded. "A letter you never meant to send." "And a man who didn't know how to listen," she added. He smiled. "I'm learning." She reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "Then keep learning," she whispered. From inside, Ella's laughter echoed, a bedtime giggle, a reminder of the small miracle that had begun everything. Evelyn looked back at Julian. "Sometimes I think about all the things that had to go wrong for this to go right." He nodded slowly. "Sometimes the story we don't want is the one that saves us." She leaned against the doorway, the porch light haloing her in gold. "So, Mr. Raines," she said softly, "what happens next?" Julian smiled, that quiet, certain smile she'd come to know. "Tomorrow, we see what the world writes next." And as the night folded around them, the laughter, the soft wind, the rhythm of a life rebuilt, they stood together in the doorway between what had been lost and what had been found. The story that had begun with a forgotten letter and a canceled order had become something larger than either of them. A promise, a second chance, a love that didn't rescue but restored.